what is the purpose, what is the relevance of the story about Easter Island relative to our discussion on the first day of the class about an optimistic and a pessimistic view of the future? Dave?
In referring to optimistic, the Easter Island inhabitants had all the supply at the beginning. They had everything they needed.
All the resources.
Right, everything to pass, right?
Okay.
And then they overdrew it.
They overdrew their account. How would you put that in terms, in bankers' terms? The words that I was seeking is that you're living, you're using your capital instead of your interest. All right, you understand that? If you got $20,000 in the bank, you can get roughly $2,000 a year interest, and if you live on $4,000 a year, then you're eroding your capital. The Polynesian people who came to Easter Island but on sailing ships, what was the capital that they had? Matt, okay? Trees, great big trees. All right, what else? Social capital, interesting. What do you mean by that? Who said that? Yep.
Cooperation.
Cooperation, social capital, okay. Fertile soil is capital. Farmland is developed capital, I suppose. Okay, fertile soil, that's good. What was required to get the fish? Canoes. What was required to make the canoes? Big trees. Now, I read an additional perspective, I think a better one than Cleveland's, that said the following. When the Polynesians first got to Easter Island, they had 8 different species of seabirds that were breeding on the cliffs. How do they know? Because they went and they looked in their old trash heaps, that we call them kitchen middens, M-I-D-D-E-N-S. It's the old kitchen trash heaps. Anthropologists love the word, kitchen middens. So they went and they found their kitchen middens. Contemporary people have done that, and they found 8 species of seabirds when they had first arrived in, did they give a year? I don't know, 1600 or something like that, 1700. So they had lots and lots, and they were breeding there, and this was a source of what? How many people had eggs for breakfast? The seabirds came in and they laid their eggs on the cliffs. They would go and grab the eggs and have an omelet or whatever for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And they had 8 different species that would come in at different times. In addition, they found in the kitchen middens many, many bones of especially dolphins, not dolphin fish, but the mammal dolphins, the small whale-like creatures. And apparently they were able to exploit the dolphins that were abundant around the island because they had the canoes and they had the technology of understanding how to build a seafaring life. Okay, when the Europeans first came there, who was it that first came there? Was it the Portuguese or Dutch? When the Dutch first came there, the people had no canoes, no trees, only one species of seabirds was left. They didn't even know how to sail on the water. They had lost that social capital of seamanship because it had been so long since they had been on the ocean in their canoes because they had no trees to make their canoes from. So what had they done? They had destroyed their capital. They did not live on interest. They did not live on the growth of the trees. They cut down all the trees, all the big trees, didn't let the small ones grow large enough so they could have canoes. They lost canoes, and then they lost that entire food source, which probably their rate of exploitation of the dolphins and the reef fish was small relative to their potential. And what happened to the population? Population went way down. What do you think? Is this a proper analogy for our current situation or not? Why? I guess I'd like to ask you, do you think it is or is not, and give me an argument as to why? Good. In the United States, thanks to early people, for example, who were at this school and other forestry schools, were growing more trees than we're cutting. All right? Not necessarily all the right types, etc., but there's plenty of trees. So we're not going to run out of dugout canoes anytime soon. Or wooden sailing ships if that's what we have to go to, okay? Good. So you think it's not analogous? Don't know. Guess that's why you're in this class, huh? Better ask the question at the end of the class. What resources do you think we're going to use up?
Natural gas, oil.
I think those are the critical ones. Natural gas and oil. Well, come on, you know, President Bush has a plan now. He's going to go and drill in the Arctic wildlife area and in Texas and his backyard and White House lawn and God knows where and find us all the oil that we need, right? That's what he says. Well, you know, there are all these collapse theorists and they've been around for 25 well, they've been around since the time of Jeremiah in the Bible. What other resources do you think might be critical that would put us in the situation of Easter Island or not? Yes, sir.
Clean water.
Clean water. Good one. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Jill, human ingenuity.
Human ingenuity. Well, you know, Simon would say that that's what we have plenty of. Don't worry. Got lots of human ingenuity. Are we going to run out of food? Well, we are going to, of course, have one of the world's leading authorities on this question, Dr. Pimentel, come here and talk to you. What other resources do you think? Let's see. Yes, sir.
Mr. Matt, diversity of food intake?
Diversity of food
Intake?
of food intake. Well, can I shift this around a little bit, Matt? I think the diversity issue is this. More and more of, for example, our corn is of a quite limited genetic stock that happens to be particularly productive. And so there is concern that when you crowd together many creatures of the same kind, that it's easier for disease pathogens to spread from one to another. So that's a possible problem. And, you know, the world is basically dependent upon corn, wheat, and rice. A little bit of some other grains, and then everything becomes much less important. And increasingly, it's the same genetic stock, so that's an issue. Okay, yes, sir.
But like the people of Easter Island lost the ability to build canoes, like they just forgot. Like we as a culture have forgotten craftsmanship, like cabinet making and, you know, handmade moldings and whatnot. I watched a show on it, and people just can't make things anymore.
Yeah, we've lost a lot of skills.
Yeah.
Question of which of them are going to be critical. For example, here's a critical skill that maybe we've lost. What's your name, please?
Stephen.
Stephen. Is how to farm without enormous amount of fossil fuel. So if that's an issue, then that's how it would play out.
If one day the lights go out, we won't be able to do anything.
Okay. Now, I think these issues play out in a much more important way on the international stage. Because the United States has three things going for it. Number one, our population density is very, very low. It's only 20%, some cases even 10%, of much of Asia, Caribbean, Central America, and so forth. You don't understand, unless you've traveled around the world as I have, you don't understand how low the population density is in even the state of New York. Very, very low. You fly over farmlands, middle of the United States. I just did this a few days ago, and it's just enormous, the farmland we have per capita. That's the first thing that's going for us. Second thing that's going for us is we have most basic resources to some degree in the United States. Now, oil and gas, that's real tricky. Got lots of coal, though. So we have a good, strong resource base. The third thing is that we've got big oceans between us and perhaps a lot of other hungry or frustrated or whatever people. Now, of course, we know this year that that doesn't protect us entirely, but it protects us to a great deal compared to many other parts of the world. And maybe we have a good system of government, in many ways, at least ideally, it's wonderful. So we have some things going for us. Things that we have going against us is the expectation of affluence. You all expect high-paying jobs when you get out of here. Relatively high-paying compared to the rest of the world. Maybe not compared to your friends that are in high finance or something, but and what's going to be the psychology of people who have high expectations of affluence? You don't have that affluence. Now, let's link the Easter Island reading a little bit to the issue, the readings that you did on energy. Now, who can create for me a concept of Easter Island and the carrying capacity of Easter Island for people in terms of energy? Can you put those things together? Remember we said that energy is going to be very dominant in our discussion. You're saying that energy is important because there must be energy investments to get the resources. And an example would be the photosynthetic energy to make a big tree, the human energy to cut it down, to swing an axe or whatever. And what are we fueling this axe with? The food, like bird eggs, right? Yeah. Or whatever. So the bird eggs gives the people who live there the energy to cut down the tree to make a canoe so they can go out into the ocean with their maritime skills and exploit additional food resources of the dolphins that are out there, right? It's all about energy, right? It's all about energy, right? To make the average calorie that you ate today required about 9.5 calories of fossil fuel. To grow the wheat, to bake the bagel, to move food across the country from the Midwest to here, to catch the fish, or whatever. Ever think of that? You will for the rest of your life. Now here's an interesting question. What happens if you have a life of affluence and you start to lose that affluence? What did they do? They got pissed off. They started killing each other. It's your fault that I don't have any bird eggs for breakfast this morning, or whatever. Now I say that is a really important potential issue coming up in the global environment over the next 50 years. Wouldn't you say so? Yeah, I think so. Now we have a question here. Yes, sir.
Well, I was just going to say that, back to the original question, I think energy efficiency is one of the biggest issues there. Is the amount of input you put in, the amount of energy you put into it, is it worth the...
What you get out? Where might that be a really important issue in the United States and in, for example, Bush's energy plan?
Well, what you were talking about with the whole oil thing, how much money is going to spend on what the reason?
How much money we're going to put in it?
Money, energy.
Energy. How much energy does it take to find the next barrel of oil? That becomes an important question. In the beginning of this century, we would invest 1 barrel of oil and we would find 50 to 100 barrels of oil in Texas, California, Louisiana. And now, I don't know exactly what the most recent numbers were, but the last time I had the data to allow me to understand this, we would invest 1 barrel of oil to find 3 barrels of oil. So Dr. Cleveland is preparing testimony for United States Congress now on this issue. And this is an important issue. You can throw a lot of money at getting a resource, but when you're throwing a lot of money, it means you're throwing a lot of energy. Money doesn't do anything. It's the energy that does the work. So when Dr. Cleveland is assessing these issues, if we put a lot of energy into getting new oil, we may get the oil, but at some point, conceivably, we'll be putting in more energy than we get back. Does that make sense?
Diminishing return?
Diminishing return, of course. Should the government help them? Well, that's a political question outside the scope here, but Enron is a very interesting thing because it's all smoke and mirrors. What does smoke and mirrors mean? Anybody know what smoke and mirrors means? An illusion. It goes back to the old days when there were traveling, well, we still have it, the New York State Fair here in Syracuse, but when you had traveling fairs going along and there'd be these people who would do these magical things and people would pay a lot of money to see these magical things, and they would say, oh, they really do it all with smoke and mirrors. You know, they hide it with smoke or have something appear to be here with a mirror when it really wasn't there, or whatever they're doing. So I was never particularly impressed with Enron, even when they were riding high, because I said, geez, those guys don't own any assets. They don't own a drop of oil. What are they doing? So was it all smoke and mirrors? But it isn't the same as Mobil or Shell or Exxon that's sitting on these reserves, right? So maybe that's a really important issue here, is that you can't have a real economy unless you have the resources. If you have the money, if you make the money through the stock market, through Enron stocks or whatever, it's just the same as printing more money. You don't have the resources behind it. So that's an important issue that we have here. How much of what we have as our incredible national wealth now is smoke and mirrors? And how much is real resources? These are important issues for you people to be doing 20 years from now. I hope I can start you thinking about that as we go on. Did we have any more questions that were not answered? Richie, what's the first law of thermodynamics? That energy can be neither created nor destroyed. Good, Richie. There's a slight change in that with Einstein, where matter can be converted into energy, so with E equals mc squared. So you can say energy dash matter can be neither created nor destroyed. But in everyday life, energy can be neither created nor destroyed. Now what's the second law? Every time there's an energy transformation, you lose some of the quality of the energy. If you put gasoline in your car and you drive home, or drive to school, or whatever, there is energy, potential energy in that gasoline. It gets transformed into the motion of the car. It gets transferred into heat that comes out of the tailpipe or heats the hood of your car, etc. The total amount of energy, if you add up all the energy you lose as heat, is the same as what you had originally in that gallon of gasoline. So we say that energy is conserved. But the quality of the energy is not preserved, because that energy has been changed and must be changed by the second law of thermodynamics in every. This is temperature. I don't ask you to know this in detail, just understand the concept. This is temperature, and this is average annual precipitation. Here's tropical rainforest, warm temperature, lots of rain. And here's tropical forest, savanna with less and less rain, desert with less and less rain, and grasslands with moderate temperature and relatively low rain, temperate forests, and so forth, all the way to tundra where the average temperature is quite cold and where generally the rainfall is pretty low. This outer line describes the conditions that exist on the Earth. In other words, there's no wet, cold areas. Why are there no wet, cold areas? Who can figure that one out? Based on the laws of physics. Yeah? Both correct. Very good. Very good. Cold air simply doesn't hold a lot of water, as we talked about. Now, what is the purpose of me trying to teach you all this stuff? The point is that what we see on the Earth, everywhere what we see on the Earth can be understood scientifically. It's not random. If we understand the physics and the chemistry of the circumstances, we can understand that the distribution of biology is not random, but is very, very much dependent upon the physical and chemical and occasionally other circumstances. Meteorological, of course. So, this is called a gradient. A gradient is just a sort of a ruler from high temperature to low temperature, from high precipitation to low precipitation. So within these gradients, these variations of conditions, we find very particular type of ecosystems. And these will have tremendous implications, as we will develop over the next X number of lectures, for the evolution of humans and the evolution of human society and the continual evolution of human society. What does evolution mean? Evolution is gradual change. That's all it means. Okay? Organic evolution, that's a little tricky. But evolution just means gradual change. Okay, let's take a look then at some different ecosystem types. I'm in a situation here where I'm taking all of my beautiful slides that I've collected over a lifetime and working all around the world and making them electronic. All right, now look, put your pen down. Oh, that's fine. Put your pens down. Just enjoy this. Let's take a look at our beautiful, beautiful planet. I find all of this just so incredible, so wonderful, in that we now today can look at things from satellites and really understand what's going on in the world. And what is going on in the world? Well, here's the tropics. And what do we see along here? We see lots of clouds. Why are those clouds forming? Because it's the upwardly moving portion of the Hadley cells. Moving parcels of air up in the air, cooling and turning them into clouds. And so it's raining a lot here. And this is where we find the Congo Basin, or Zaire Basin, lots of lush tropical rainforests. 30 degrees north, we have the Sahara Desert. You see it's dry on the Horn of Africa, even though it's near the ocean, it's just the wrong latitude to have very much rain. And likewise, Kalahari and other deserts in South Africa are very dry simply because there are 30 degrees and the air masses are descending. It gets more complicated when you get further away. Here's Antarctica. You've got some cyclones, some storm systems, and you can't see what's going on up there. But there you go. There you can actually see this basically. And we begin to understand these processes, and you look at the Weather Channel, and you can understand all these things happening simultaneously. There's just another look at it, and this is a kind of where the clouds have been removed. And you can look at the vegetation. That's backwards. That's East Africa. This is West Africa. Oh well, doesn't matter. As I said, we're just in the process of figuring out how to make these things electronic. You see a little pixelization, but I don't think it's important. So we're looking at the Sahara Desert here, the great deserts in the middle of the continent, 30 degrees and a little bit north. In Asia, we're simply so far away from the source of moisture, which is basically the ocean. Got ice caps, obviously, in Greenland and Arctic, and on high mountains, especially as you go north. And we have very large areas here of boreal forests, which we're going to look at. Okay, next. So this is a vegetation map. Here we have deciduous forests that we're used to, but they're rare. Here's tropical rainforests, especially over here with, where all these Pacific islands are close to oceanic sources of moisture. You've got savannas a bit north and south of the rainforest. Tropical grassland and savanna. This area, here. And a bit of it in Australia, North Australia. And then, fundamentally, you get into deserts. Middle of Australia. Again, look, it's about 30 degrees north and south. This is the Tropic of Capricorn. This is the Tropic of Cancer. Each at 23.5 degrees. That's the furthest extent of the movement of the sun. And then we have large areas of temperate grassland. And we have large areas of taiga, of coniferous forest, just north of us, just barely to the north of us. And then we have lots of tundra further north. Next. An interesting thing about the tropics is the diversity of climate types you have. Where is this picture taken? On the equator. This is Mount Kenya. And it's got permanent snow at the top. So it can be cold on the equator. Often is, in the Andes, for example. And this leads to a tremendous diversity of ecosystem types in the tropics. Tropics are much more complicated, much more interesting in a way, speaking as somebody who now principally works in the tropics, than the temperate zones. Next. Okay, tropical rainforest. This is what a tropical rainforest looks like from the air. This is the Brazilian, or I'm sorry, this is actually the Peruvian, but it's Amazon basin. I've flown over this many times. It looks like this forever. Next. But it's not always that way. This is also a tropical rainforest in Brazil, the border of Brazil and Venezuela, where you have what are called special black water conditions due to organic matter in the water. It has relatively small statured trees, and it's a lot of water. It's just very different. Next. Orographic effect. There's a beautiful picture of the orographic effect. This is Lago Nicaragua in Nicaragua, in Central America. This is a big volcanic mountain there, and the trade winds are coming in like this. They get pushed up the mountain and they turn into clouds, and it's probably raining like the dickens right there. So you can see this all the time. We got some wonderful pictures in Puerto Rico just a week ago now of up on the top on the clear day with the clouds coming in at us. And Andrea, I hope Andrea took the pictures, and you could just see the orographic effect take place in front of your eyes. Next. Here's a cloud forest in the top of a place like we just showed you, where the orographic effect is producing clouds on the mountain. Next. You got tropical rainforest. You have a tremendous number of trees that are growing here, often large, and each tree is covered by many other kinds of plants, many of which will look familiar to you as house plants. Bromeliads, the pineapple family. These are called epiphytes. They're trees that grow on top of trees. You go to the bark of the tree and you push your hand in and you go through 2 inches of other species. There may be, in fact, 200 different species of plants growing on this tree. And so what you have here is a situation where you have a whole ecosystem growing as a tree. And the interesting thing about this is if you look at the nutrient concentration, phosphorus, nitrogen, potassium, coming in from a meteorological tower at the top of the canopy, and then you look at the rain that makes it through the canopy, the nutrients will be less. This whole living mat sucks nutrients out of the atmosphere, out of the rain coming in, even though it's very dilute. And this is one way this whole suite of organisms works together as an actual ecosystem. Next. Here's a view, rather a cartoony view of all the incredible animals that live in this environment. There's a jaguar of some kind, a heron, lots of frogs, although I can't see them right now, lots of birds that are living in the wet tropical forest in these conditions. So it's an honor, not in addition to having specialized plants that live in this environment, we have all kinds of specialized animals. There's a monkey. And of course, this is a bit of a falsification because the animals are never that abundant in one place at one time. There's a kingfisher, all kinds of beautiful, beautiful animals out in these environments. And of course, we all know that these are environments that are being threatened today with a tremendous amount of conversion to other land uses or forest cutting. Next. Now, most tropical forests are not wet, they're dry. And here's an example of a dry forest at the edge of the ocean in Costa Rica, Guanacaste province. You see all the leaves have fallen from the trees, just as they do here in the winter. We're going to go on with savannas next time. Any questions about forest structure or where you sit or